Our city council is now in session pursuant to RCW 4231-10-1I. The city council will now enter into executive session to discuss pending and potential litigation. The executive session is slated to last approximately 45 minutes until 7 p.m. All right, we are adjourning our special meeting, calling the regular meeting to order. Would the clerk please take the roll?
Councilmember Culver,
Present.
Councilmember Sassen. Here. Councilmember Shrubnik. Here. Deputy Mayor O'Kane. Here. Councilmember Lutsis.
Here.
Mayor Herbig.
Here.
Councilmember Marshall.
Unless there are any objections, Councilor Marshall will be excused. Hearing no objections, Councilor Marshall is excused. That brings us to our land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the city of Kenmore is situated upon the ancestral lands of the Snohomish, Snoqualmie, Soxhawtl, Duwamish, Stillaguamish, Tulalip, Suquamish, Muckleshoot, and other tribes who are part of the Coast Salish peoples. We recognize and express our deepest respect for their enduring stewardship and profound relationship with this land, which they have cherished and protected since time immemorial. We honor the First Peoples, acknowledge their vibrant cultures, and commit ourselves to learning from their wisdom in our journey to promote justice, equity, and mutual understanding. We pledge to stand alongside these communities in acknowledging past injustices and working towards a future that respects and celebrates the diverse heritage of this land. If you would all please stand and join me in the flag salute.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Unless there are any objections, the agenda will stand approved. Hearing no objections, the agenda is approved. Madam Deputy City Clerk, where is the fun?
The fun was at the Head of the Lake Regatta, which is considered by many as the most prestigious fall regatta in the Northwest. This year's event on November 3rd hosted 72 clubs and 450 entries, including Kenmore's very own Inglemoor High School. The Varsity Lady Vikes completed their fall season by sweeping all events they raced in this year, a feat unmatched by any North Shore school previously. And a fun story to go along with the Head of the Lake Regatta. Perennial powerhouse Green Lake entered the Head of the Lake as one of the favorites to win. At the finish, they could be heard yelling and congratulating themselves, knowing that there was no way that some public high school from Kenmore could beat the behemoth known as Green Lake. A head race is different than a sprint, as both do a staggered start, so you don't know your final place until you finish. And the Lady Vikes congratulated Green Lake on their race, and they went back to the dock not knowing how they finished. The Scrappy Vikes, the program that won't be defined, the Kenmore Darlings not only finished their fastest time, but they also won the race against Green Lake. A quote from crew coach Doug Van Gelder. Every time I think these ladies are nearing their ceiling, they prove me wrong. They have one goal this year, and I expect them to fulfill it by going to nationals and representing this great city. And I just really like this photo, so I wanted to end on that.
Go Vikes, that's great. Thank you. Next on our agenda is public comment. I want to welcome folks to the council's meeting. Please address your comments to the mayor and council. Folks will have 3 minutes to speak. Clerk will call your name when it is your turn. Please state your name and city of residence and keep within the allotted time to make every person feel welcome and safe here. Please refrain from booing, clapping, heckling, yelling, or other interruptions. The meeting is recorded for transparency. Thank you for being here and for sharing your input respectfully. Clerk.
Thank you, Mayor. We have 3 guests on site wishing to speak. Edward LaSalle, Elizabeth Mooney, Patrick O'Brien, followed by 2 guests online, David Dorian and Stacy Valenzuela.
Edward LaSalle, proud Kenmore resident. Mayor Herbig, Deputy Mayor Kane, council members and city staff, I stand today to lend my voice in strong support of the financial sustainability plan recommendations presented later tonight by our city manager. I had the privilege to be part of the FSP group at the beginning of the year, and while the task force was not in a position to perform a comprehensive audit of past and planned expenses, it was nonetheless obvious to us that Kenmore's financial situation was due to a revenue issue, not a spending one. Unexpected inflation, rising public safety costs, and legal limits on how city can adjust taxes to match the cost of new programs have all played a role in our current situation. I know you're all committed to being careful with Kenmore's residents' tax dollars, but I urge you to address the revenue issue directly. Cutting services alone won't solve the underlying problem. While I'm first here to encourage you in fixing today's budget imbalance, I also want to encourage you to think of the city's needs tomorrow and how we should fund those as well. In light of the recent national election, we can expect the next 4 years to see massive reductions in federal services across the board. Our ability to future-proof our residents' needs and access to services will only succeed based on what services we provide locally in Washington State, not what we can expect to come from Washington, D.C. How we secure our future tomorrow will happen today. This means funding more proximity services here for when they disappear at the federal level. Kenmore is a wonderful place to live, and it deserves exceptional public services to match. However, we'll not be able to afford to maintain these services without addressing our revenue challenges. I hope the FSP recommendations provide a roadmap for achieving financial stability and ensuring that Kenmore continues to thrive for generations to come. I'm here today to support these recommendations and encourage you to implement them quickly and effectively. Thank you very much.
Hello, Elizabeth Mooney, citizen of Kenmore, and I'm here to talk about a few things. So I'm going to list them because I've gotten the opportunity recently to see some staff, talk to staff, and talk to council members. Thank you for city council coffee and looking forward to the next one. And I also appreciate that community members came and met up with the council members that came to council. So thank you, thank you. And so I've just learned so much since you had your October 28th Laris property exceptional tree amendment. Yes, I'm super disappointed. I wish it'd been the other way. I'm still hoping that you will choose to go back to the original tree ordinance, frankly. But meanwhile, the most important thing right now for me to say is that I think we need to keep those trees up at Jay's Cafe. I have learned from your city engineer that there is a road, I'm going to call it the road to nowhere, that is to the north end of Laris. And I've heard that those trees don't have to come down. And I've also heard from other members of the community that that whole road didn't go through as much of a process that I think a lot of community members would like to participate in because it goes so near the Heron Rookery, et cetera. And it impacts the beginning of, and let me just applaud you because we are going to have, I believe, affordable housing, a senior housing project. And I do appreciate the rigor and your Councilmember Sesson, I really appreciate the email that you sent about balance. So one, I think we need to look at the Laris as the beginning of not a problem, but an opportunity to have a livable community. We need to get it right the first time so we don't make exceptions to everything. And thank you, Councilmember Lutz, for pointing that out. But the heart and soul of Melanie O'Kane on October 28th, I mean, it broke my heart that you didn't all vote that direction. Anyway, but I also learned a lot about nurses. There are a bunch of nurses, the Alliance of Nurses for a Healthy Environment. We need to work on air pollution. Trees at Laris will help make that the beginning of our affordable housing. And I also don't understand the difference, and maybe we can figure this out tomorrow because thankfully Samantha and Riley are going to work with a whole community 9 a.m. tomorrow. But I don't understand why part of Laris is urban corridor and the other part is residential. Do we really want to be cutting down a bunch of trees that are exceptional trees as the beginning? I don't think so. I think we should make sure that we get it right, work with the developer and the architect, save the trees, and I look forward to the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Patrick O'Brien.
Pat O'Brien, Kenmore, Washington. First of all, I think you should review your commitment to the tribes and what we're doing out at Lake Point, the non-testing of the waters. I think that totally goes against that statement. I think you are planning well in advance of public input. Mooney just brought up the point that there's the road to nowhere. Well, it seems as though that there's several property owners that are not being consulted on projects that affect their property. And I would think that you would want to have meetings with them before you got into any kind of a design phase on any project that deals with the taking or the property is going to change. As we know, that whole area needs to be redone, and it's not going to be the city that does it. It's going to be private industry that does that with private money. And the fact that we're hiring consultants and spending millions of dollars on projects that we don't even own is just far-fetched. We don't even have an accountant that's looking at some of these budgetary change-ups that I know of, and certainly the finance director isn't an accountant. So how does that comport with meeting your budgetary end of days as far as the federal funds go? They're disappearing. The maintenance facility is still an issue that I'm not going to let die, because this road to nowhere seems to include attaching to that, which means the Heron are at risk, and that the Sound Transit's use of the old fire station goes directly against your environmental goals of not impacting that rookery. So you need to look at that. We need to enforce Washington State versus Pioneer Towing, and that is a signed consent decree. And we also need to document now all owners of the trailer park homes and look forward to federal subsidies for the buying of land so they can put their dwelling on there, or somehow find a way for the group to buy it together. The homes are literally being sold out from underneath them, and the rents are double what they were some time ago. You need to take action on that. The boathouse, I'm glad the Kenmore Rowing Club is doing so well. That's a great use of that rowing club, but all the public should have access to that facility, and the people that have signed up to pay for that need to be made to pay. There are just a few concerned citizens that come here on a regular basis, but given that nobody else is showing up on a rainy day, I'd say if you don't like hearing from us, put things to a vote. Let the voters tell you what they want. Thank you.
Thank you. David Dorian, can you hear us?
I can. Can you hear me?
We hear you. Go on.
Okay, good. All right. Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and City Council members, I'm going to speak off the cuff tonight rather than from prepared comments, just to keep things more human. I'm talking about the housing element that you're going to review, but not as a member of the Planning Commission, just on my own recognizance as a resident of Kenmore. I'd encourage you to have a robust discussion on the housing element, particularly the pieces that the Planning Commission were not able to review as a commission. That's just a timing thing. It's not anything that anybody did wrong there. I want to be clear about that. There's been a lot asked of our community development team this year on that front. But the land capacity analysis and the adequate provisions are some of the key pieces in new housing elements. It actually gives us data that we can look at and make decisions from in an area where we really need data-driven decision-making. So, for example, there's a piece that we don't have yet that I'd really encourage that we do get, which is to look at our historic production against the needs for housing that we do have. That does seem to be an expectation that Commerce has, and I've seen it across some other housing elements as well. Again, nobody's fault we don't have it. There's been a lot that's been asked, but if we are able to look at that data, we can see that our total goal between 2020 and 2045 is 3,070 units, which would mean we need 123 units per year to hit that goal. If we look at the number that's in the land capacity analysis of 275 units built since 2020, that's roughly 69 units per year. So these are not exact figures yet, because I'm just doing the math from what we've got. It's not the full 10-year production trend that we would want to see, but it's at least some numbers that give us a sense we're roughly half the production that we need to be at if we're going to hit our targets. And actually that gets much worse as we go lower down in affordability. When we look at 30% again, if we looked at our production there, we would have to assume that the pipeline is actually -1, as we're seeing there. So I just really want you to have a robust discussion around the land capacity analysis. yes, we're showing surplus, but we're not showing much surplus when it comes for land area for 30% AMI. And then really think about what's been termed as the barriers. I know we reacted to that word last time that was raised. That is just a word that the state is using when we're not seeing production at the rates that we need to hit those targets. So just encourage some deep discussions around that. I understand why that's difficult. It's been when you've tried to do good things around affordable housing in the past, there's been a couple of incidents where that's really come back to bite council. But I think we need to move beyond that and be able to have that robust discussion in open session so that we can understand from the data where we need to go next. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Stacey Valenzuela.
Stacey Valenzuela Kenmore, can you hear me?
Yes, go on.
Thank you. One of the interview questions the council asked the Planning Commission applicants is, how will you make efforts to reach out to the community? I ask you the same. Participants take their time to come forward, but they seem ignored due to staff limited directive already adopted in one-on-one meetings and task force handpicked and led by the staff. In a city with so much air pollution from the asphalt emissions and cement particulate matter, trees are needed to help absorb these contaminants. Established urban tree canopy also act as a physical barrier, keeping down noise, heat, water pollution. They improve the health of all living things, yet you adopt the staff directive of lowering the exceptional tree ordinance to in the urban TOD for a road. Heat islands. It's very simple. Climate change is one of your priorities. Show the action. The developer and property owner are stating that the original site plan had 175 moderate affordable housing units and worked to save the trees. They worked so hard. However, they were notified and persuaded by staff to clear cut the trees for a possible sound transit road to nowhere. The staff presentation seems misleading. Did anyone hear the staff disclose this directive? No. Presentations need to disclose all the options, not just favorite or directive of staff. How many times now has information been misconstrued or behind closed doors, not as a public hearing? Where's the transparency? Where's the integrity proclaimed in your candidacy? If climate change is really a priority of the council, we need a revote and rejection of the staff change to the exceptional tree ordinance. We came forward to support Climate Commitment Act, Climate Action Plan, and even the climate emergency. Were all these just a facade to get the state funding and not support the actions? The affordable housing preservation, protection, and new building is needed to keep residents housed. I appreciate the city efforts to do what's right, to keep our residents most vulnerable house. However, here are cities' cries to stop the continued funding of a few clubs and absorbent cost of public works over affordable housing. We need your actions to represent your priorities of environmental protection and affordable housing. The claims of development of affordable housing are missing the mark of housing lowest incomes with mostly 60 to 85% AMI. More than those that are being priced out to the streets is critical and needs action now. Just look at the incomes, 17,000 to 30,000 senior fixed incomes and 25 to 56 incomes. Will you take the opportunity today to show with actions these priorities? Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. That concludes our speakers list.
All right. I want to thank everybody who came and spoke. We appreciate your input. Next on our agenda is the consent agenda. The chair would entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved. Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. Is there any discussion? Being none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The consent agenda stands approved unanimously. That brings us to our first of two public hearings. First one is proposed ordinance 240617, amendments to the 2023-2024 biennial budget presented by Finance Administration Director Melinda Merrill.
Good evening, Council. Good to see you again. And I am going over basically the same slideshow I had the other day, last week, regarding the budget amendments. So this will just be a review. And for those people online who maybe didn't get a chance to see it. So it's that time of year at the end of the biennium when I need to look at how we are ending the year regarding our expenditures and make appropriate adjustments so that there are no funds that appear as negative balances. So if there need to be any adjustments where it could be negative or where we did not get the proper budget approval in the very beginning because we ended up spending more along the way, and I need to have more budget capacity to make sure that all of the expenses are covered. So that's why we're here for the budget amendments. So these are the impacted funds for the budget amendments, the general fund, surface water management, Lake Point, Kenmore Automated Photo Enforcement, Public Art, and ARPA. So for the general fund, we are looking at increasing our capacity for expenditures, which would relate to the Lake Point Fund. So I'm looking to increase that budget line by $650,000 and with no changes to revenues being proposed. And then for the Surface Water Management Fund, we're looking to increase our expenditure line by $290,000, again, for transferring dollars into the Lake Point Fund and no changes to revenues. So this is a recap of numbers you've seen along the way the last few months. So we are looking to create a new fund called the Lake Point Fund. It will come forward at the November 18th meeting. And the revenues needed in that fund would be money for a bond anticipation note, the transfer from SWIM and general fund, and bringing that total revenue to 2.2 million. And then the expenses on the project would be a property deposit of 1.5, some consulting and legal costs for a total of 2.1. So in the CAPE Fund, just looking to align our expenses and our revenues accordingly. So expenses are tracking higher to the tune of 200,000 and revenues are also tracking higher, another 200,000. So they kind of offset each other, but it's needed to increase our budget line for that. Public arts, we spent some money for the story pole and we need that line item budgeted. And that would leave us with $71,000 in fund balance. We're not anticipating any revenue changes. In the ARPA fund, we need to make sure that that fund is cleared down to zero as we are closing out that fund. So we just need to make sure all those dollars are cleared out appropriately. So here's a summary of those amendments in total. So for revenues, total impact of 2.4 million and expenditures, an impact of 3.5 million that would be needed to adjust the 2024 budget line items. That is all I have. Any questions?
Questions, comments? Okay. So with that, we're going to open up the public hearing. The same public comment rules apply, including stating your name and city of residence and addressing your comments directly to the council. If your comments have been fully expressed by preceding speakers, we encourage you to summarize your statements by stating your name, city of residence, and saying I agree with the previous speaker. We'll hear testimony from our on-site guests first, followed by pre-registered virtual guests. And again, I want to thank people for taking the time to participate in the public hearing. I declare the public hearing open. Oh, wait. Yeah, I declare the public hearing open.
Thank you, Mayor. We have two guests wishing to speak and give testimony. Patrick O'Brien on site, followed by Stacy Valenzuela online.
You go first, Mr. O'Brien.
Thank you. Pat O'Brien, Kenmore. Acronyms don't work for me. She had things in the budget that were ARPA. I want to see the full description of what that line item is because not everybody knows all acronyms used in government. If you have any doubt in that, look at the military budget, you'll know. So the other thing is, once again, we find ourselves spending money on something we don't own, like Lake Point. $2,240,000 for Lake Point. $500,000, more than $500,000 in consulting for property we don't even own. So there's no testing being done. I don't see a line item for testing because you haven't done any, or if you have, you haven't told anybody. So I don't see how this is even possible to be in the budget. You say you have a shortfall. You think you're federally going to have a shortfall from funding? Well, I got news for you. You got to be spending on the core items that you're delegated to fund and maintain, and you're not doing that. You're on some wish list of buying yet again, like the maintenance facility, and you waste money because you folks at staff level don't know how to organize. You're not realtors, you're not developers, and other items, other places in Kenmore look like it. Looks like you've thrown a lot of public money around and not gotten a consensus. And Lake Point is critical, and nobody's given a staff report on who is actually reporting on a regular basis on what's going on at Lake Point. There's a lot of activity. There's activity on the weekends. There's some light manufacturing going on. Where's the reports on that? Not here, just not present. So you spend a lot of money on things. I'd also like to know if any individual budget is going up or down. Or did you spend more than you thought or less than you thought? That wasn't clear. And it wasn't clear by department either. So it was kind of vague. And I think if you have a shortfall on funds this year, you ought to look at cutting back on these things that you don't own and you're spending millions and millions of dollars on without voter approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Elizabeth Mooney on site just signed up as well. We'll hear from her next.
Elizabeth Mooney, City of Kenmore. I appreciate your delving into Lake Point. I appreciate that our staff, our council, and our people care about it. That's why, as I recall, that's how the City of Kenmore incorporated, thinking that we were going to have Lake Point. There are so many citizens that were involved in stopping Lake Point, and they were for good reasons, the Olsons. And so what concerns me, and I think I've even said this forthrightly to our city manager, maybe even to the council, I'll back up. How much did we already spend from our city on the past development ideas that came out to be zero? There was Widener, there was, I can't remember them all. But going back to 1998, could you, before you spend that extra money in our challenged budget right now, could you please at least let us know how much our city already has spent on the land that is owned by the person who has now filled up all of the wells? So you cannot now, with Department of Ecology, do what was supposed to happen, which is test those wells for the contaminants. So we've got the state not helping us out, and you are responsible for providing prudent use of our money. So I think that you owe the transparency to our entire community before you authorize more hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's not Lake Point. It is Kenmore Industrial Park. And when I look on our website and I see all the wonderful things as if it can become Shangri-La, I think the reality is that we need to talk about where are the dioxins coming from that are in Lake Washington. I'm not saying it's from Lake Point, but I think you have to be honest about what was dumped there and by what, WashDOT. I mean, what is there? It was a MOTGA site. And before we spend a lot of money, why is it isn't given to us first by Gary Sargent, Why doesn't that body of ownership give us the right to test there first before we give anybody more money from our taxpayers? I think he owes us that. Plus Scans is there now for 3 more years. And the citizens have been working really hard. One of them is Janet Hayes. And I think if you had a community meeting with Janet Hayes here, she could show you the boxes of documents that go way back. Thank you.
Thank you. Stacy Valenzuela, can you hear us?
Stacy Valenzuela Kenmore, can you hear me?
Yes, go on.
Thank you. Seems to look like the only savings on the budget is from actual employee wages from empty positions, not department savings. I do not support and hope you decline any further funding to Kenmore Industrial Site, Pioneer Towing, Lake Point, whatever you want to call it, until proper testing and invoicing of the property owner for required cleanup per the consent decree. Over the last 25 years, millions have been spent on consultants, feasibility studies, et cetera, just a loss of money. The residents deserve the funding to properly test that site. And a public vote before any agreement to buy this Modka site or any portion of it with designated contaminated, you call Lake Point Dream. We would greatly appreciate that. And I know part of this is covered by the previous speakers, and I support their statements, as well as the many that have come before you for the last 20 years, asking that you please check that site out. Please enforce the consent decree. Please change it from an industrial dump site to a zoning that would protect the people of Kenmore, the health, and let that property mend for a while. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Mayor. That concludes our speakers list.
Is there anybody else present who wishing to be heard? Anybody else present wishing to be heard? Anybody else present wishing to be heard? All right, seeing none, the public hearing is closed. I have just a couple really quick questions that I'm hoping the city manager might be able to help out with. So in that Lake Point Fund, I assume that some of the consulting and legal would go towards testing once we had a letter of intent with Mr. Sargent?
Correct.
And would I also be correct in saying that we would need a public vote before any final purchase was finalized with Mr. Sargent?
Yeah, right now, my proposal would be that you go to the voters to get the funding to fully purchase and develop the portion of Lake Point into a park.
So this is essentially our due diligence.
That's correct.
Thank you. Anything else for move to the next public hearing? Councilor Lutzis?
And just to clarify, Mr. City Manager, have we also received some funds to assist us and offset the costs of the due diligence that we plan to do before any purchase is made?
Yeah, we've applied for a Conservation Futures grant to help us with the acquisition of the shoreline portion. Oh, thank you. Yes, we've also applied for and gotten a $450,000 grant to help us with the due diligence. Thank you.
Councilor Culver?
Thank you. Just wanted to speak briefly to acronyms since that question was raised. ARPA, America Rescue Plan Act, that's around $5 million. I might be getting that wrong. In federal COVID recovery money, there was originally a lot set aside for affordable housing, but we wound up spending most of that money to pay our police contract. The other was Kenmore Automated Photo Enforcement. We expanded that program this year, meaning more expenses and projected revenue both.
All right, I'm going to bring us over then to the second public hearing, which is the preliminary 2025-2026 biennial budget presented by Finance Administration Director Brenda Merrill.
Thank you, council. I'm here to talk about the 25-26 proposed biennial budget. This is just a high-level summary. I know you've already received your budget books in detail, and it's also online for those people who want to see it online. So tonight, I'm going to have a presentation, and then, of course, there will be public testimony. On the 18th, I will bring forward the regular and excess property tax levies. And then on the 25th, another public hearing and the potential adoption of the budget. So what direction do we follow when we create the budget? We are looking to support and implement city council goals. So that is the first thing we are considering when we develop the budget. We also look at the service level budgeting guidelines that we have in place. Our goal is to have a balanced budget that takes a conservative approach for both revenues and expenditures. We want to maintain a positive financial forecast that meets our reserve policies, which is 20% in reserve, and that's 20% of our operating costs. And then including any financial sustainability plan measures that are supported and approved. So this is the page from the book that you can see all of the revenues. So these are all of the city funds. The first one is the general fund, and then they're broken down into the remaining funds down to our equipment replacement fund, total of 89.6 million for the biennium. And then the expenditures by fund, again, starting with general fund down to the equipment replacement fund. You can see our total expenditure budget is 110.572. So that's a big difference, and you should be asking why there is a big difference. The main difference is if you look here on the expenditure slide at the Public Works Operations Center Fund, about 2/3 down on the list. $19.6 million of expenditures. Well, we will have already received those dollars through different mechanisms of debt to pay for those, to pay those costs. So we will have those dollars sitting on our books. We're about to go out for bonds that will be 12 million, and we've already pulled 4 million. So there's a difference in the 19.6 from this other slide. You see 3.6, so that's the difference, is about $16 million, which will be paid for by pulling into our coffers some debt. The other big difference is Surface Water Management Fund, which has a healthy reserve balance, and we are planning on spending close to 3 million, about 2.6, I think, million dollars of those reserve dollars in our surface water fund. So that's intentional. So those are the main differences in that disconnect. So there are basically 3 main components of our budget and how we look at it. So obviously operating revenues are what most people think about. Our day-to-day work that we're doing comes through our general fund. We also combine and look at both general and street fund for operating purposes. And then to some extent, we also consider our surface water management fund an operating fund. It works in conjunction with the surface water capital fund, but it is an operating fund where we have people being paid out of that fund and whatnot. And then there's other funds in the budget. So we have other special revenue fund categories, debt service funds, which is for our bonds, and then internal service funds such as equipment replacement. And then, of course, we have our capital costs. So capital improvement program, which was just adopted in October, it's made up of transportation, parks, surface water, public works operations center, and then the resources that help fund those activities. So the impact fees, REIT, and bonds. So this slide shows you the breakdown of where our revenues come from. And you can see our heavy reliance on both property taxes and sales taxes. We have been doing a good job at creating some diversification in our revenue streams by adding in some new utilities and other taxes. So in 2023, we added a surface water utility tax, a solid waste utility tax, a cable, and we increased our gas by 2%. So we're getting some other sources of revenues, which is really helpful in helping us balance the budget. So again, here's another look at the significant revenues we have. So our property taxes for the biennium are about 12.5 million. It's our largest source, and it's 36% of our budget. We are looking at, which you'll see next week, a tax levy increase for 2025 to the tune of $202,842. This is equivalent to 3.45%, which is utilizing about $144,000 of bank capacity that we have, and which was a recommendation of our sustainability plan. Plus the cost of new construction gets added in there. So the tax rate would be 0.77 per 1,000 assessed value. In 2024, it was 0.85, so it's actually going down, and that's because our assessed value has gone up. So the Kenmore assessed value was around 7 billion, and now it's estimated to be 8 billion.
Linda, if I can, on that 77 cents, it's not exactly 77 cents. The assessor will tweak it a little bit, but it's going to be pretty close to 77 cents.
Yes, we're still in the preliminary stages of the numbers we get from the assessor. So other revenues, of course, our sales tax at around $9 million for the biennium, and then the utility and other taxes is just over 5 million. And again, those are the sources of our utility taxes: electric, solid waste, gas, surface water, cable, cell phone, and telephone. Some of the other operating revenues that you'll see in the budget, we get, that comes into the general fund, we get an overhead reimbursement that comes from the Surface Water Management Fund. Of course, plan review and land use fees, franchise fees, and permit revenue. So those are some sizable sources of revenue for the general fund. The street fund has fuel tax revenue, transportation benefit district fees, and right-of-way permit fees. And then the Surface Water Management Fund brings in surface water charges. So what are some of the main costs that we see? So these costs are costs specifically in our general and street fund budget. And these are ongoing, non-discretionary 2-year totals. So for the biennium, we have salaries and benefits of just over 15 million. Our police contract is 9.5 million. And then some other related police costs to the tune of 1.4 million for jail, court services, attorney, the racer costs. Our legal costs are encroaching on $1 million. They're at 900,000. Our insurance costs have gone up tremendously with WCIA, and now for the biennium, it's 1.6 million. Utilities are about $1 million, and then human services contributions, $750,000. So the total there is 30 million, which makes up about 74% of our total budget. And those again are ongoing non-discretionary costs for the biennium.
Yeah, I'm struggling with the term non-discretionary when we're talking about, I mean, I am 100% supportive of all these, but I believe the human services contribution and ARCH are technically discretionary, correct?
Well, yes and no, because we do sign agreements to spend that certain amount. So outside of an agreement, yes.
Yeah.
So as you had seen in the previous presentation, we do have some new positions that are being proposed. So this is a comprehensive list of all the positions There, 3 full-time FTEs. One is a business and community engagement coordinator, one is a budget manager, and one is a full-time public works manager. And then, and these are just for the general fund. And then 0.25% increase in the building official to bring them to 1.0 FTE, and a 0.375 increase in the permit coordinator, again, to bring it to 1.0 FTE. And then new positions that would be split between general fund, transportation capital fund, and the Kenmore Automated Photo Enforcement Fund. So position would be a engineering inspector, and the other would be a civil engineer. Also included in the budget is an increase of 3.6% to our salary ranges for 2025, and we have an estimate of a 5% increase in 2024, and benefits average an increase of 5%. So here are the positions that are impacting the general fund. I've kind of gone over this before, but I wanted to make sure it got included with those other 2 positions, the budget manager and the public works manager. So those are now included in this chart, and also with the offsetting duplicate staff that was mentioned before. So the total for all the new positions impacting the general fund are just over 400,000 each year, for a total of 854,000 for the biennium. And as I mentioned, here's how those other positions are being, the other areas positions are being funded. So the engineering, 2 engineering positions partially out of transportation capital and out of CAPE. And then 2 new positions that would be funded via Lake Point, a capital project manager, and then a limited term senior planner. And here's the impact of all the positions. So this includes the general fund impact, the transportation capital fund impact, the Kenmore automated photo enforcement, and Lake Point. You've seen this before. These are the capital costs, and you guys did approve the CIP back in October. So this is a chart you've seen before. I wanted to include it again here, but also give you the next chart, which just shows you a nice breakdown of the cost in each fund. So parks, a very small amount, facilities, obviously a large amount because of the project that's coming up, and transportation, capital at 16 million, and surface water at 7. And then these are the associated revenues. Again, you've seen this chart before, but this is the breakdown of where the revenues come from. A lot of state grants. SWIM pays for a lot of things. Our real estate excise taxes, 3.46 million, some actually coming from carryover. So you can kind of see the breakdown there. So what are the next steps after tonight? This is our first public hearing, and then at the next meeting on the 18th, again, I will do the regular and excess property tax levy presentation, and then the Lake Point Fund ordinance will be on that agenda as well. And then the 25th will be another public hearing and potential adoption of the budget. It does say on this slide that we will have the salary plan included on the 25th, but that we won't be able to make that deadline. So that is going to get pushed to the December 9th meeting. We're having a salary study done, and we're just still trying to get all the parts to that study completed. So that is the end of that presentation.
Questions? I am not seeing any. So As with the previous public hearing, folks will be granted 3 minutes to speak. Same public comment rules apply, including saying your name and city of residence, and addressing your comments directly to the council. We hear testimony from our on-site guests first, followed by pre-registered virtual guests, and we want to thank folks for taking the time to participate in the public hearing. I declare it open. Clerk.
Thank you, Mayor. We have one guest signed up on site wishing to speak, Patrick O'Brien, followed by Stacy Valenzuela online.
Hey there, Pat O'Brien, Kenmore. That budgetary presentation blew my mind. If you have a 5% increase, 3%, 5% increase for employees across the board, what's that in 10 years? That's 30%. That's 50%. We really want to pay city employees 50% more now than we are in 10 years, or no, then, you know what I mean? 50% over 10 years, that's a lot of money. And it just seems like there's no constraint. They're doing analysis on seeing if we can justify the obscene increases in salary. I couldn't believe it. And for the budget to be $30,359,458, I remember when it was $10 million to run this city when we incorporated. And now we're at 30 million, and we still got about the same number of people. I mean, how many times can you cut the deck and not have that mean a whole lot more money for everybody to cough up? That's just crazy. We used to have the bowling alley provided $1.2 million worth of tax revenue off of one card room. You have no functional relationship with that organization. You have no idea how to include them in your budget and how you could make a lot more money in sales tax or gambling tax. The whole world is betting on ponies, football games, and everything, and it's on TV. And what do we've got? We've got no cow making that kind of milk. None. We should be focusing on that, and you should find somebody that has a relationship with that bowling alley and its ownership and see if you can turn them into allies and friends. But that hasn't happened. As a matter of fact, you've got a whole plan for developing all the restaurants along 522. As far as I know, you haven't talked to them in any meaningful way. You should do that, definitely. And then the money for Lake Point, my God. What other people said is, you haven't done the testing yet, and you're just leaking millions and millions of dollars, and you're hiring 2 full-time employees for something that you say, oh, we're too poor to do the testing. The testing should come way before any attempt to spend public funds on a project that has been a big, big pain for everybody in Kenmore. And the people that said they wanted to buy it, looked at it and walked away. There's reasons for that. And the reasons are that you're pushing a pipe dream, and the pipe dream can't happen when you really get the results of that testing. Thank you. Trim back the budget. Stop the funding of Lake Point right now.
I see that Elizabeth Mooney on site has also just signed up. We'll hear from her next, followed by Stacy Valenzuela.
Thank you, Elizabeth Mooney. Okay, so I'm just going to say thank you for everybody. And I'm just going to try to give the benefit of the doubt to everybody, whether it's the previous speaker or our manager right now. I just want to say, I think the dream is great. And Joe Marshall went on a site visit with us. And in my experience over the years that I have lived in Kenmore, I have asked to go out with people to have a site visit, and everybody gets a chance to talk. So way back when the 520 bridge was going to go and did go onto Lake Point, there was a big old meeting here with all the bigwigs, and all of the people who were in the transportation bigwig state reps. They got to go out on Lake Point with their hard hats. They actually told me, no, you can't go out because we don't have a hard hat for you. It didn't feel good. 520 happened. And then we worked together with the city. And thank you, Rob Carlinzi, for listening, because we stopped the arsenic-ridden demolition and we got a head start. So what I'm thinking is that I don't think Patrick O'Brien is saying anything wrong. I think it's true. If we could get the consent decree to happen, I don't know exactly why that can't happen. But our city manager is trying to lead us down a road where we have somebody to, if I understand this budget that she just mentioned, somebody that would have to manage that. Yes, absolutely. If we were to have that piece of property, if it goes to a vote and the people vote for it, well, then yes, oh my gosh, we've got to have a property, somebody to manage that, to make sure that we're safe. I don't know, Rob, if that's where you're coming from with that, but for the benefit of my doubt, for you benefiting me, I'm just trying to say, what if in the due diligence, we have a community go out on Lake Point and we have the staff, we get permission before you put it to a vote, because it is really easy to take a little oval and go, of course I want a piece of property, a park on Lake Point so I can take my kayak. It sounds lofty and lovely, but it would be better, I think, if we did a site visit. And I'm not saying don't pass what is on this budget, because that's above my head about how budgets work. But before you put it to a vote for the due diligence, I think it would be really helpful for the community. It would provide transparency. It would also invite Gary Sargent to come out there perhaps, or Washington Department of Ecology. And, you know, it's a dream. If we can get the salmon restored, great, site visit.
Thank you. Stacy Valenzuela.
Hi, Stacy Valenzuela Kenmore. Can you hear me?
Yes, go on.
I'm not sure about some of the items listed in the general department label, but I do not see details disclosed. I see $3 million earmarked for environmental services. However, there's no details, and I'm questioning, is this actually money for Lake Point and not implementing any climate action or environmental services at all? The Climate Commitment Act dollars expected are 4.1 million, yet 3.1 million is designated for sidewalks, only 80K for climate, and thousands more for more consultants, again, for Lake Point. For both parks, there's 200K for rhododendron and 80K for tall chadis. Is this funding for actual park work after millions of upgrades in the last couple years? Or is this actually for the row club, boathouse, and kayak cost? The clubs should now be paying all maintenance, all utilities, and rent for those facilities that are not accessible to public, nor were the residents included or given a chance in public vote if they wanted their tax dollars to be funding these clubs for just a few residents. Only the North Shore School District parents paid their share of the boathouse and should be allowed to continue to use the facility. I'm disappointed that only 10% of the previous budget for human services is going forward. I have come to you before for years against the waste of 35 million over the necessary for public works facilities, when each year there are public work employees' salary and benefits paid, yet more services are contracted out for the same jobs. Why are we double dipping on these same jobs? This is a waste of money. It doesn't even make sense. Why aren't these people that are hired doing the work? The city can't afford it. The taxpayers can't afford it. And there's so many other things that we need in this city that seems to fall by the wayside, like affordable housing, helping our seniors, helping other people stay housed that are not getting done, but we have double wages for the same services. Please look inside your heart. Other things are much more important than just the same old. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Herbig, that concludes our speakers list.
Anybody else present wishing to be heard? Mr. LaSalle, you can give your testimony and then just make sure you sign up with the clerks for the record.
Hello, everyone. Edward LaSalle from Kenmore. I really enjoyed the presentation. I don't necessarily have comments as much as I have questions, and one specific with regards to the future-proofing the budget. Last 6 months, we heard a lot about tariffs at the US level, at the national level. And unfortunately, while tariffs might seem like a good idea, they might also include a raise in our cost of living for everyone and in the cost of goods purchased for the city. So my question is kind of twofold of, is there any way we can kind of future-proof the budget for the cost of goods sold, but also everybody remembers that we've just come out of a 10% year-over-year or almost 10% year-over-year inflation period. And while this would translate, if we were to express it again, the 5% wage increase would translate in a 4% or 5% net purchasing power loss for city staff as for me, for example, if I had the same approach. So my question was for the staff is more just, and for city council on how can we make sure that those variabilities, which might very well happen based on the importance that tariffs have had on our political conversation nationwide, be measured in the budgets that we'll have for the city for the coming years. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you. And if you'll make sure you sign in with the clerks. Thanks. Anybody else present wishing to be heard? Anybody else present wishing to be heard? Saying none, I'm declaring the public hearing closed. Brings us to our business agenda. First item, proposed ordinance number 240617, amendments to the 23-24 biennial budget. Merrill.
Thank you, Mayor Herbig. I don't have any additional things to present to you other than what I have previously provided.
Additional questions, comments? Councilmember Sassen.
I just have a question for clarity for my own needs. 2 slides from your presentation. One, the first was the proposed city budget, all funds, and we broke it down into annual and then the biennium. So 42 million, 89 million roughly. And then further on, the major operating expenses for the 2-year totals, we talked about 30 million being 74% of the total operating cost, but I am unclear if that was for the
That was-
biennium or annual.
That was just for general and street funds combined. And so it was for the biennium.
It was for the biennium, okay. Because 30 million doesn't represent 74% of the biennial budget, but it does for the annual budget, and that's.
Then maybe it was annual. I don't have it in front of me.
That's
I can
totally
go grab
fine.
it, yeah.
I feel like the major operating 2-year totals, I think it was maybe the 1-year totals.
It probably was,
Okay,
yeah.
thank you. I just
Yeah,
for clarification.
that makes sense.
Appreciate that.
Any other questions or comments? I just want to get one thing clarified, maybe for the public and maybe for the council also, but Councilmember Culver brought up a comment about the ARPA funding and how that was spent on, how some of it was spent on police. Could we address that a little bit for the public? Because it's a little bit more nuanced than that.
Sort of, yes. So when we first got the ARPA funds, there were surveys done and analysis done on how to spend the money. It involved reaching out to the public and coming forward for recommendations to council. And so the money was spent in a few different areas for supporting businesses, supporting residents in various ways. But the big item that was intended for the money was to spend it on the Plymouth or affordable housing, which turned into the Plymouth project. And then as we know, that did not happen. And so we regrouped and said, well, how can we make sure that we spend these dollars according to the rules that exist in a, quicker manner now that we have to change course. And so we became aware that we could use those dollars to pay for our police costs. So that's how we ended up using the money, was to pay down our police costs.
And can I finish the story?
Yes, please.
And so what that did is it freed up general fund money for us to continue spending on ARPA intended things. So, because it was spent on police, we no longer are calling that funding ARPA, we're calling it special projects. And so we used about 2.3 million of it to reimburse the general fund for purchasing the Holt property, which is intended for the Imagine Housing affordable housing project. And then in the budget, there's about 2 million left for the next biennium of this special projects money made possible by ARPA. And that's outlined in that particular budget category. So economic development, climate, human services, and we've gone over in previous meetings how to spend that remaining 2 million of the special projects money indirectly made possible by ARPA.
A caveat, but yes, thank you. Any other questions, comments? All right, seeing none, the chair will entertain a motion to approve proposed ordinance number 240617.
Moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? No, we got a second from the deputy mayor. Any discussion? Councilmember Culver?
Thank you. Most of this is all straightforward. CAPE, public art, ARPA, et cetera. We have voted on these things. Of course, have to update our books to match. Makes perfect sense. I'm in full support. But I'm a no on Lake Point, so I'll be voting no on these amendments as a whole. That said, I'm now halfway through my 11th month as a council member, and I finally get to cast my first formal vote against Lake Point. So thank you for creating this opportunity. I'm genuinely grateful. And thank you again to our public commenters. Community voices matter. Thank you.
Any further comments? Seeing none, would the clerk please take the roll?
On the motion to adopt ordinance number 24-0617, amending the 2023-2024 biennial budget, Councilmember Culver,
No.
Councilmember Shrubnik. Yes. Councilmember Lutzis,
Yes.
Councilmember Sassen,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor O'Kane,
Yes.
Mayor Herbig.
Yes. The ordinance passes with 5 in favor, 1 opposed, and 1 absent. That brings us to our second business item, preliminary 2025-26 biennial budget. Anything further to address on that? Do we have any further questions then on the 25-26 budget? City Manager?
This is your opportunity to pause and reflect and offer any adjustments so that we have time to make them in time to get the budget adopted on November 25th.
Councilmember Culver.
Thank you. I have one thing looking over Lake Forest Park and how they've been navigating their budget piece, specifically with automated photo enforcement. I'm going to get some of the specifics of this wrong, but if I'm not mistaken, the legislature passed a new bill allowing civilian staff members to review some of those tickets to help offset ballooning public safety costs. I wanted to make sure that we were aware of that and see if that's something council would be interested in pursuing, if so.
I mean, I'm not sure. Would that be a budget discussion, City Manager?
Thank you, Councilmember Culver, for bringing that up. With the warning period going into effect for the 24/7 enforcement, and I think that started a week ago Monday. We're getting a lot. And as when we did it the first time, we got a lot, but then people got the message and the numbers came down. But right now we do have sworn police officers reviewing those tickets, and it is a pretty big workload. So I am proposing that we monitor it. And if it is still a pretty big workload on our police officers, because every minute they're reviewing those tickets, that's a minute that they're not on the streets. I do want to leave that option open. if we did, we would do it within the budget provided and with the revenues provided. We may want to start out with like a part-time civilian or something like that. But I'd like to have those discussions with my coworkers. And we would need a few months before A, we know what the numbers look like, and B, what our options are for staffing. So really good point to bring that up. And I would like to explore it.
Yeah, I agree with the city manager and Councilmember Culver. I think it makes a lot of sense because our police are very well compensated. And if we could have somebody a little bit less compensated doing that work, that would be lovely. So I think that's good that we're going to be having that discussion. Any further thoughts on the 2025-2026 biennial budget? Councilmember Lucis and then Councilmember Sassen.
I do have a thought, and this is just to address budgets in general. And really quickly, I'll make this brief, but budgets by nature are idealistic. They encompass our goals, priorities, and visions for the future. Now, we must be responsible with our budgets, and that takes precedence over everything. But we also can't see into the future. Situations change, things happen, costs go up and down over the course of the 2 years of the biennium, which is why we have regular budget amendments as we just passed less than a few minutes ago. Aware of this understanding of our budget and what it is, we know that money set aside, in this case for Lake Point, is merely that. It's simply earmarked. It has not been spent. It is not guaranteed to be spent. If things don't go right, say we can't make a deal on the property, due diligence and testing comes back with a bad result, voters don't approve the purchase or anything else, that money is reallocated to other city services and the Lake Point funds would be closed. And our budget would be amended to reflect that. I think it's just important to keep in mind that budgets are idealistic, but they are not set in stone and they constantly evolve over the course of the biennium.
Any further comments on the 25-26 budget? Councilmember Sassen.
Two things. I just want to express my support for increasing staffing. And then I also really want to reflect the public comment made by Mr. Nassau. I think that we are in a period of a strong economy with anxiety for the future. And as this budget proposal came up, the one piece about it that really gave me some pause as we move forward was the decrease in new construction and development that we have in the pipeline. And I think that that has implications for our tax base, and I think that has implications for our housing goals. And I just want to express that concern. I don't have an answer for it at this time. And then again, we really are heading into a period of uncertainty about the economy moving into the next administration regarding what will happen with interest rates and employment rates and cost of goods with tariffs. And I want to acknowledge that and say that I feel, as I think Councilmember Lutz has said, we can't bulletproof this, but we can acknowledge it going in. And that's the best I have to offer right now.
Yeah, kind of building off what Councilor Sassen said, and this is advice, I think, for everybody right now. If you have any big electronic purchases that you're thinking about over the next few months, get them now, because unless you want to pay 25% extra after the first of the year. So, Mr. City Manager, if we have any, laptops we need to be purchasing, say Q1 of next year, maybe we do that earlier. I don't know. Because it does sound like there are going to be some serious price increases, especially around electronics.
Your Honor, if I could just also comment on what I've heard. Yeah, I do want to make it clear that this budget does not assume a recession. And recessions often start happening before you know they're happening. What's our guard against that? Well, number one, just to be very vigilant and be watching our revenues very carefully, and then making modifications to our plan accordingly. That's number one, just constant vigilance. And then we do have strong fund balances. I also want to say that even though we're not assuming a recession, we're not assuming big growth in our revenues either. Our sales tax is the most, what they call elastic revenue. And we're assuming very modest increases in sales tax. I think it's like 3%, 3.5% next year, and then like 1.5% increase the following year. So those are very conservative. But that said, if a recession happens, sales tax will go down. So also I've mentioned this before, but we are going to be, we have forecasts on the CAPE, Kenmore Automated Photo Enforcement. It's a relatively new program, and there's several $1 million in this 2-year budget that is depending on that money. And so are we being conservative in our estimates? Yes, but it's also a new program. So that's another risk in this budget. And then also, I've mentioned before, one other risk or thing to think about is with the one-time special projects money, we've got several things in there that could be considered ongoing, where we're starting new programs. And that's where the financial sustainability plan kicks in. We have those funded through the financial sustainability plan, which you'll talk about next. But I just want to make sure that you and the public are aware of, you know, the most obvious risks to this budget.
We appreciate that. Not seeing any more hands. I want to thank staff for all your work on the budget. I know it was a huge lift, as it is every year. But I really think you put together a really quality product here. And yeah, I just want to thank you. That's all. All right. That brings us to item C, City Manager's Financial Sustainability Plan Recommendations, presented by City Manager Robert Carl-Lindsay, Finance Administration Director Melinda Merrill, and Assistant to the City Manager, DEIA Coordinator Garrett Oppenheim.
Well, it is our pleasure to come before you to discuss the city manager financial sustainability recommendations. You've seen a presentation previously on the task force recommendations, and so this is a modified version of that. And obviously, I have Rob sitting next to me here, and Garrett, who had done work in the prior FSP task force and then helped put together this presentation as well. So appreciate the support I've had on this project. So what is a financial sustainability plan? So it's future-focused planning document that sets forward strategies for long-term financial sustainability. So it's a guide that signals intent for future years. I think that's important to remember. It's the intent here of where we need to go. It's not a binding set in stone document. And it has had a great amount of input from the community, and it's focused around council goals and direction, and it's within the confines of available resources. So as you're aware, we did have a FSP task force back in 2020 who did similar work, and we have been implementing those recommendations. This is just a list of their recommendations and the timeline that was recommended and the actual completion date of those recommendations from 2020.
I don't expect you to read all that and go over that in detail, but the kind of a main takeaway for me on that is most of that, the lion's share of that got implemented. So you adopted a plan and you followed it. So that's pretty cool.
So why did we feel the need to reconvene another task force? When I had done a forecast shortly after I got here, it showed us that our reserve goal would no longer be met as early as 2029. So we would have a need to have 4.5 million in reserves, and at that point it was forecasted we'd only have 3.7, and then it would continue to decline after that. So we felt it pretty important to move quickly and get another task force together to address this situation. So why did the other task force, not seem to meet the full 6 years that it originally planned? Well, as you all know, we had a pandemic, and there was a lot of things that happened during that pandemic, one of which was higher than expected inflation that negatively impacted us. Also police costs and insurance costs. You guys have heard about that. That just was so unexpected, and it has such a huge part of our budget. So it really is something that we can't just, easily solve. Obviously, you all are aware we have state limits on how much we can increase our property tax revenue. And then other revenues have mostly been flat. Some are declining. And then we've incorporated some other programs from separate funding into the general fund. So where they were in other funds previously, they're now all in the general fund, and we need to make sure they're covered. So the 2024 task force. So as I mentioned, we updated the forecast, and we took applications for the task force. We appointed 9 residents, and we met 11 times starting in January through April. They were open public meetings. We did have some residents from time to time who would come to the meetings, and it was recorded, and that was all posted for the public to listen to. And then the task force presented their recommendations in April and May. So how did we get engagement with the community? So we did a statistically valid survey asking the community about the budget. We had an interactive tool called the Balancing Act, and we had 772 views and 67 simulated budgets. So that was pretty cool. We had the Bang the Table online community engagement platform. We had an in-person open house, a town hall, and the meetings, as I mentioned, were recorded, open to the public. And of course, we did many communication outreaches through social media, the newsletter, the weekly top 4.
And if I could just add, so it was a really fun thing to watch the task force run most of this. Like, they ran that town hall. They organized it. Task force members, including Mr. LaSalle right behind me, they put together the PowerPoint. They did the presentations. They answered questions. It was really cool to watch, and just really fun to see members of our community roll up their sleeves and do the work. Loved it.
Yeah, I agree. I think I've mentioned to you all that in my career, this was the coolest thing I've ever been a part of. It was fun. It was great to work with people who are interested in my work and wanted to help solve problems. And it was just really awesome. So I appreciate that opportunity. I'm not going to go into detail on these. You've seen these, but these are the FSP task force recommendations from earlier in the year. Couple pages of those. And then here is what the city manager came up with from those recommendations, slightly modified in different areas that we're proposing.
And this list may look smaller than what you just saw, but a lot of what the task force got recommended, or what they recommended, got included in the biennium budget. So what you see here are mostly items moving forward beyond the biennium.
So this is a comparison of what the task force recommended and then what's in this recommendation from the city manager.
Again, that's a busy slide, but I think a key takeaway is that there's a lot of yeses, meaning we're following a lot of most of the task force's recommendations.
And I'm going to turn it over to Garrett.
Thank you, Melinda. So this slide just shows some of the expenditure strategies that are included in the FSP. So obviously there are both expenditures and revenue strategies, primarily revenue, but let's look at the expenditures real quick here. You can see that we're going to continue the expenditure reductions that the task force recommended. And then we have these two human services programs that are included in the proposed budget, the caseworker slash program navigator and the utility tax rebate slash assistance pilot. For the 25-26 proposed budget, these are funded through that special projects money that we were talking about earlier in the meeting tonight, formerly ARPA, or made possible by ARPA. It's one-time funding, so to keep those going beyond this current upcoming biennium, additional revenue will have to be raised. Next slide, we can look at some of that. So these are the revenue strategies. We're going to go into these in more detail on the coming slides, so I'm not going to go through that list. Yeah, just go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So first up, we have the Metropolitan Park District. This is a levy lid lift. It would require voter approval, and to keep on schedule with what is in the FSP, that would be a ballot initiative next year. You can see on here, it would be 5 cents per $1,000 of assessed property value. And it has two aspects. First is a repayment to the general fund for Lake Point expenses. That's $1.3 million in 2027. And then second is ongoing support for existing parks operations. And that is estimated to be $300,000 in 2027, and then increasing with inflation moving forward. Next slide.
I just need to be clear that 5 cents is for that 300,000. So the actual amount to purchase and develop Lake Point, the property tax levy for that would be in addition to the 5 cents. So I'm just worried that somebody's going to come back and, let's say we do, I don't know the number, let's say we do a 30 or 40 cent levy. Somebody might come back and say, well, you said it was going to be 5 cents. No, it's 5 cents to help us with the operating budget. There will be additional levy needed to actually purchase and develop Lake Point. And we don't know what that is yet.
Thank you, Rob. That is an important clarification. So next up, we have the Public Safety and Human Services Levy Lid Lift. This would be a ballot initiative in 2026. And the revenue from this would be to help pay for rising costs of police contract with King County Sheriff's Office, programs like the Regional Crisis Response Agency, RACER, co-response for mental health issues, and other human services. This would be a 24-cent property tax of $1,000 of assessed property value. And you can see that the estimated financial impact is $1.68 million annually beginning in 2027. Then we have expansion of the CAPE program, would be one more camera on the north end of the city. This would be authorized councilmanically, and the revenue for this would be used for traffic safety activities and infrastructure improvement with an estimated financial impact of $550,000 annually beginning in 2029. Then we have a transportation sales tax. This is a modest sales tax increase of 0.1%. The revenue would go to street fund and street maintenance operations. And you can see that the estimated financial impact of this is $460,000 a year beginning in 2027. Then we have a second small sales tax increase of 0.1%. This is for additional public safety revenue. Let's see. It would be a ballot measure in 2029. And it would also raise about $460,000 a year beginning in 2030. And the last one that we have here is picnic shelter rental fees. This would be an additional $17,000 of revenue for the city annually. And that does include the payment that would be made to the Kenmore Senior Center so they don't lose the revenue that they're currently receiving for Rhododendron Park.
And just a little side note there, we need a a picnic shelter reservation policy first, and we're going to be bringing that to you in December.
And I'll hand it back to Melinda.
Thank you. So on the left of your screen is where we're at today. If no changes happen, you can see that our total revenue, the blue line, is well below our total expenditures, which is the teal line, and the deficit continues to grow. And that is not a good budget model to follow. On the right, with the budget strategies we have presented, you can see we have a little bit of deficit in 25 and 26, but then as those measures come into play, we rectify the situation, and then we kind of follow the same trajectory for both revenue and expenditures as we go into 2029 and 2030.
And the FSP task force was willing to tolerate the deficit in 2025, 2026, because we have the strong fund balances and knowing that we would make incremental changes to pull ourselves out of it in future years. Also remember that about 2 million of those 2 red bars is drawing down of the special projects money, that one-time money, and about 1.3 of it is transfers to Lake Point. So the remaining about $800,000-ish is actual operating budget deficit. Also, the green bar in 2027 on the right graph there, you see that that's if we end up purchasing Lake Point and the voters approve a Metropolitan Park district that allows us to pay back the 1.3 to the general fund. So that's why you see that green pop there in 2027.
So here's another view of where our fund balances could end up. So on the current trajectory, again, you see that we would be not meeting our goals in 2029, but with the budget strategies, we would have healthy reserves that are more than meeting our reserve goal. So this is the evening for discussion and feedback, and then we will bring it forward later this month for adoption.
Questions, comments, Councilmember Shrubnik?
Yeah, thank you for this. So 2 things. One is when this is brought back again, or maybe it's even something we can clarify today, it seems a little confusing between slides 9 and 10, which are the FSP recommendations, and slide 11. And I heard you, City Manager, say that, well, some of the recommendations are already incorporated in the budget, and then some of the figures are different between the FSP, and some of them are combined lines, and it'd be great to have like a table that kind of said, here is FSP, here is what City Manager is recommending, with the amounts lined up so that we could kind of just get a little clearer in that. I'm just struggling with that. So that's one comment. And the second comment is, as you've said before, I mean, this isn't set in stone. It's, looking into the future, and here's some recommendations of how we might generate revenue and cut expenses or consolidate expenses. I will just go on the record. I would like us to consider, I think one of our audience members mentioned it, and we've had it mentioned on the council, looking at allowing a card room again. It was bringing in a lot of revenue. I feel like we should look under every rock. That wasn't a rock that the FSP explored. I feel like we should at least look into it. And similarly, I know the FSP did look at a B&O and did not recommend it. Again, I feel like that is a rock that I would like to look under as well. So those are the two things that I hope as a council, we decide to look at.
Councilor Lutzis?
You had some, Your Honor, she had some questions in there. Can we address those or?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, and you two can help me out here, but yeah, there were some differences in numbers between the city manager's recommendation and task force. I think the main ones were like property tax. They had it in 8-cent increments, and we're just saying 24 cents. So if you take their 8 cents at increments, we're recommending the first 3 of their 8-cent increments. So that explains one difference. Another one is the Cape revenue. At the time, the task force was meeting during the state legislative session. And unbeknownst to us and them, state law changed to allow for the 24/7. And so they were assuming lower like school zone type revenue. And so that's why our numbers are a little higher. Ours are still conservative, I believe, but our Cape revenue is higher because we now know that the 24/7 law changed.
Right.
So-
I think, you know, this is the kind of thing that I think it'd be great to just have in a table, just so that we're transparent.
Yeah, and did you have was another question in there?
The card room, I think, was the second part that she brought up.
Oh, well, yeah.
Okay.
Councilor Lutzis?
Yeah, just a couple of things. One question, one comment, but I'll start with the comment. So there's the recommendation of going to the voters next year for the Metropolitan Parks District. And one thing I just want to put out there too is that there is also the North Shore Parks and Recreation Service Area considering going to the voters next year for a levy themselves. My only concern, thinking, politically, is if there are 2 measures on the ballot, 2 parks districts things, a Kenmore Metro Parks District and North Shore Parks District thing, both for the same amount. It's just something to keep in mind and be strategic about when we do this, how we do this, and in coordination with the timeline there. But just, yeah.
Can I respond
Please,
to that?
yes.
Yeah, so the name of the game really nowadays is local government jurisdictions are going to be going to the voters all the time. So next year in April, we got the RFA next year. Don, I'm not talking for or against. I know I've just got Dawn looking at me. I feel her looking at me.
I appreciate that power. Let me clarify. So speaking to a ballot measure that has not been put to the voters, those rules don't apply until then. So when the
Yeah.
council adopts a resolution asking elections to put it on a ballot measure, then we will be very,
Yeah.
cognizant.
All right, so let me just list off the ones I know of. So we've got RFA in February. We've got county renewing APHIS in April. We've got county going to renew the parks levy in August. We have the county going to renew their EMS levy in November. And NPRSA is likely to also renew their levy in November. Now fast forward to 2026. Oh, and we're hearing rumblings that the county might want to do their own public safety sales tax in 2025. Now let's go to 2026. The school district's going to be doing their levies, their 3 levies in February. There might be an NPRSA pool levy in 2026. And I'm forgetting something. I'm sure there's going to be about the similar length of list that I mentioned in 2025. So it's kind of a get in line scenario now.
I understand that. My point, I guess, was when you have very similar sounding measures that, voters may pick one or the other. If you have 2 parks districts competing against each other, maybe they won't be as inclined to pick both. My point was mainly just making sure that's on our radar. So we can coordinate when we put that on the ballot, so maybe it gives us a little bit better of a chance. But that was my only point there. The other question I had, you actually touched on, and that has to do with the public safety sales tax and potentially King County and their role and what that might look like. If you could just expand on that briefly.
Yeah, so either way, we will see money. If King County does it before us, then we cannot do our own 1%, but we would get a portion of what they collect. And if we do our own, we'll get our percentage, but then it kind of goes into the mix. I don't remember the nuance if you do, Rob, but it impacts how much we get in the long run.
Yeah, the MRSC revenue guide has some good information on this, but the county can do up to 3/10 voter approved, and then they would have to distribute 40% of that back to cities on a per capita basis. Cities can do up to 1.1% as long as the 3/10 hasn't been taken by the county. Cities would keep 85% and then have to distribute 15% to the county. So one way to look at it is, would we be better off with 85% of 1/10 or 40% of 3/10? And if the county only did a 2/10, we would still be able to go for the 1/10. Snohomish County just did a 2/10 levy last week and it failed.
Yeah, my question there was, since you had mentioned the rumblings of a King County public safety sales tax, how that could impact the plan being presented tonight if we have recommended a public safety sales tax, just to clarify that those competing things for the community.
Yeah, I think if the county goes before us, because you can see this isn't until 2028, or 2029. If the county goes before us and it passes, we don't see that as a fatal flaw because of cities getting 40%.
Thank you.
Even if they only do 2 cents, we're 80% of 0.2 is still better than 75% of 0.1. So, Councilor Sassen.
Couple things. Okay, I think I'll just take them one at a time. Is the municipal park district going to voters? Is that the way that the voters will give their input on Lake Point? Or is that a separate? You know what I'm asking? Am I making myself
one
sense?
more time?
So
Sorry.
so the municipal park district will, if we move forward on that, we would take that to the voters. Is that the form in which the voters will be giving us input on Lake Point? Or is that separate? I'm not making sense. Why am I not making sense?
The mayor's shaking his head.
Yeah, no, I think what she's asking is if the vote that you have listed in here to create the MPD, she's asking if that is the same as the Lake Point vote. And to me, those are two separate things, right?
Well,
They don't have to be, that's why
They don't have to be, but they could very well be on the same thing on the same ballot. So we still have a narrow window. It's getting narrower by the day. But we have a narrow window to do the testing, work with ecology, get questions answered in time to put full Metropolitan Park District with this and Lake Point funding on it in 2025.
And as just stated, that's two bubbles on the ballot, not one bubble combining.
Oh, no, it'd be one ballot question to form the Metropolitan Park District. Yeah. And then.
So what I think I hear the city manager saying, correct me if I'm wrong, is if things align in the next month or two with the property owner and we're able to move forward, then we could potentially put an MPD out that would cover both the creation of the MPD and the funding necessary for Lake Point.
Yes.
Otherwise, the plan is to put something forward that would just create the MPD with a small 5 cents to backfill general fund for parks. And then at a later date, we would have a separate measure to increase the MPD for Lake Point.
Okay.
And can I just clarify? So again, we're still feeling our way through the fog a little bit on this, but we may still have to put the full up to 75 cents on the ballot. And then let the voters know that until we know what we're doing with Lake Point, it would be the new board, the new Metropolitan District Board would be issuing the 5 cents initially. And then pending Lake Point, the board would have the authority to go higher.
Okay, so to vote for the MPD is an endorsement on my personal ballot for Lake Point. If the testing goes forward and we have. Yeah, I can't quite figure out why I'm not making my point. I apologize. I just want to know, are we going to go to the Kenmore public and say, do you want Lake Point or not? Separate from, are we going to do an MPD or not? And what I'm hearing is no, we're going to try and do all of our due diligence up front. If we can get it done in this time period, and it will be a single question, MPD that will reimburse and include Lake Point. That's that. So now I have it. Yes. Okay. I needed to know that. The second thing I wanted to ask is just a small thing, maybe on the picnic shelters. Will there be, are we envisioning that as a single fee equivalent across our entire populace? Or could we talk about discounts for Kenmore residents and seniors and that kind of thing?
Or anything? Yeah, we can definitely talk about that when we bring it to you next month. But yeah, it'll be a user fee. Yeah, discounts for Kenmore residents and seniors. I don't know that we've thought through that yet, so we'll follow up.
Okay, I was just thinking about that from a DEIA perspective. And then lastly, not for tonight, but for future, I would really like to see some projected, even if it's a fantasy number, how much would fully developing Lake Point financially how much would that potentially benefit the city financially with construction fees and tax base? I'd like to see some estimate of that. Also, thank you for putting up with my questions.
No, they're great questions. I believe we did have that analysis done back in 2018 when Widener was the developer. That can be done, but we'll need some help from a consultant to really get that number correct. But it can be done over the next year or so.
Any other questions? Councilmember Culver, was that a hand? Okay. All right. So I'm just checking here. It says and direction. You're not asking us to adopt this. You're just checking with us and then you're putting on a future consent. Double checking. Okay. Any further discussion then before we move on to the next topic? Councilmember Culver?
Okay, I'll jump in. Thank you. I have a lot of feedback, frankly, that I think is pretty beyond the scope of our 25-26 budget and sort of a lot of what we've talked about with the FSP process, which has been excellent and given us a lot of tools to play with. Super excited about that. All good things. I will try to make this brief as possible. Looking at our public safety budgets, we discussed it a few weeks ago, but that went up $1 million per biennium twice in a row, which is starting to feel less like an anomaly and more like a trajectory that we can extrapolate from. I know when we've casually discussed it in the past, it doesn't make sense to bring that in-house. That's just a lot of apparatus to stand up from scratch, but I have to imagine there's some break-even period in the future that maybe that became more plausible with this most recent budget. So I would just ask staff to like, just keep an eye on that and just look into that and see on what timeline that could potentially become an option. If that's outside of the scope of something that we can do alone as a city, we've got our estranged, call it what we want, city over in Lake Forest Park, or maybe Bothell, team up, something like that. We've seen the regionalization model work well with the RFA came up, the fire districts. A lot of fire districts are moving to that to better utilize resources and stuff. So anyway, hasn't gotten a lot of airtime, but I thought it would surface that. I also want to talk briefly about Public Works. This was covered a bit at the last meeting, which is good. Thank you for surfacing that. I also just, I mean, in my opinion, I think we should really just step back and make sure that we are getting what we thought we were going to get out of sort of the bring Public Works in-house project. Initially, we were going to pay for it with all of the savings from our contract with LFP from that difference. I don't think those numbers math anymore. I don't think the math is mathing. I also did some cost comparisons since we're comparing cities on staff usage. There were a few listed, and I just, out of curiosity, looked at what those other cities have in terms of public works facilities. There were a few listed. Covington has a public works building to the tune of $568,000. Mill Creek does not have one. They have a lot with sort of a driveway loop for storing materials. We can do better than that, but okay, they're pulling it off. Maple Valley, 3.6 million, something like that. Lake Forest Park, I couldn't find the exact number, but they've just got like a fairly modest house for $400,000. It's been a couple decades now, but you know, certainly well beneath what we've got for $22 million. So, you know, we threw along the term like unsexy, and like I get that, but also like, does it need to be sexy? I guess would kind of be my counterpoint to that. So I have not detected any appetite from my council members to discuss this further, but to me, that continues to be a big issue. So I wanted to fully raise that as part of the FSP process. And Lake Point, which is obviously very expensive. So yeah, and the only other two things, which I mentioned back in May when we took this up, the card table and the B&O tax, I think are going to be worth looking at in the future. So I think I will stop there. Thank you.
Any other comments? I just want to voice support for, excuse me, jeez, getting over a cold. I want to voice support for what I heard from Councilmember Shrubnik about, and I think I just heard from Councilmember Culver about B&O. Is that what I heard? Yeah, I think that's something that we do need to be taking a look at. If not as part of the FSP, then I think we need to fold it in there at some point, or at least have a started discussion around that. And I will again, and I know I said this back in April, and I'll say it again now, and you know, I'm not super excited about going forward with an MPD unless we actually know that we're moving forward with Lake Point. I think it's going to be a much easier sell publicly if it's tied to that and it doesn't stand alone. I really have reservations about doing a standalone MPD. But that's a discussion for a different day when we get there. Anyway, any further discussion on the financial sustainability plan? All right, I'm not seeing any. Thank you very much. Unless there's any objections, I would say that maybe now is the time to take a quick let's call it a 10-minute break. Come back at 9:05 unless there's any objections. Not seeing any. Be back at 9:05. All right, it's 9:05. Council's coming back to order. Next on the agenda is the comprehensive plan, housing element and land use element presented by Community Development Director and Principal Planner Todd Hall. Sorry, it said Community Development Director, didn't have Debbie's name on there, Debbie Vent and Principal Planner Todd Hall. I was reading this.
Wait a minute.
This is what I get from not reading ahead of time. I was like, wow, Todd got a real promotion. Congratulations.
Well, we're both here to talk about the housing and land use element. You've received the Planning Commission's recommendation. And at that meeting, we also let the council know that there would need to be a public hearing because the land capacity analysis report had a placeholder, but we didn't have the full report. So in order for the public to see that report, we do need to procedurally have that public hearing. At the October 28th meeting, you provided many comments which were more editorial in nature. They were not really substantive. What I'm looking for tonight is any additional substantive amendments that council wishes to consider that then can be presented at the November 25th hearing. So a substantive amendment would be something like adding a new policy, really changing a recommendation that the Planning Commission has provided, or any new information that you want to add. There's still time, so no worries. If you still have editorial comments, we can still make those. But really tonight, I want to ask if there are any substantive comments that council wishes to consider.
We're opening up right now.
Please.
All right, Councilmember Trubnick.
Well, I just want to thank you for being so detailed and responding to council comments. I made an awful lot of them. And I don't know whether this is an ad or not. I alluded to it last time. Are we clear enough in our policies to say that we want to look into small houses on small lots? I mean, do we need to, because that is not missing middle, and we talk a lot about that. It is not step. It is some other animal. And I don't know whether it makes sense to have a policy that specifically calls that out.
My personal opinion is it's not absolutely necessary to add that policy. It is an implementation measure to provide housing choice and so I think we have enough in the current document but if you want to add one, we can certainly add one, but I don't think it's absolutely necessary. So if that is the wish of the council, I need to kind of have 4 people wanting to make that change if we are going to do that.
Okay, doesn't seem like, Councilor Trubnick, did you want to propose a change? All right.
I mean, you know my opinion. So if we feel like we have sufficient policy language in there such that we will get to the point of having that either be on the Planning Commission docket or ours, ideally in the next year, then we're good. If we feel like we need more language such that if someone like me is no longer on the council and we haven't gotten to it, it will disappear. So that would be my concern.
Well, I guess the other thing is council will be reviewing and approving the 2025 docket. It will be brought to you in, I believe, scheduled on your January 16th meeting as the first draft. Will be brought forward for adoption at I believe that's the January 25th meeting, if that's the last meeting in January. So there's also an opportunity to make sure it's on the docket.
Yeah, well, we've done that for many years. So I guess I'll go ahead and propose that we add a policy that either explicitly says within the list of choices that we consider small houses on small lots, because that is different than the way I think the planning commission and what I've seen in other documents, we talk about cottage housing, which is kind of the cottage cluster. And that is different than, post-World War II, small houses on small lots, which I would like us to look at that. I go to city after city, small cities that are older and still have these. And boy, they are just terrific options, and they're affordable, and there's a pride in ownership. And I just really hope we would have that as part of our mix.
A motion? All right, we have a motion. I'll second for discussion. Oh, sorry.
That
what
was
do you
my
want?
question. I was going to ask if it was a motion.
Okay, we've got a motion. Do we want to discuss Councilmember Shrubnik's request that we explicitly add language about small houses on small lots? Any discussion? Councilor Lutzis?
I support it. I think it's another tool in our toolbox when addressing this need in the community.
Councilor Sassen?
Yeah, I heard this evening from, during our public comments, a request that we have a robust discussion about the needs of our community. And I just am not clear whether this is that discussion or whether there's room in our the calendar of our next year to have a planning commission council study session to further look into this. I need information about
I
that.
feel like we might be, we have the motion in front of us right now, and I think that's the loud side of that motion, so. Okay. Any further discussion on the motion? Okay, I'm not seeing any. Would the clerk take the roll?
Yes, will you kindly restate the motion for the record, please?
I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Councilor Shrubnik, it's to explicitly call out small houses on small lots as a potential strategy. Is that correct? Okay. We're not approving the final thing tonight anyway, so we'll see it before it comes before us for final direction.
Okay, on the motion to explicitly call out small houses on small lots as a potential strategy, Councilmember Culver,
Yes.
Councilmember Shrubnik,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor O'Kane,
Yes.
Councilmember Lutzis,
Yes.
Councilmember Sassen,
Yes.
Mayor Herbig.
Yes. Motion's adopted unanimously. Any other substantive changes that we want to discuss with our director? Councilmember Culver.
Thank you. Two things. The equity, I'm going to forget the name of the document, but there's a lot of mentions of racially discriminatory covenants. We sort of bring them up in narrative form, which is good to acknowledge, and I think part of state law. Okay, excellent. I always, can we go a step further? Can we dig into the data? I went looking into this and found a map of historically racially restrictive covenants. And there are some interesting patterns. I know folks watching can't see it, but I will describe it briefly. Northwest corner of downtown, and then just south of the Sammamish, sort of on the east side of 68th. Some interesting patterns there. Knowing that these things can have a lot of staying power, I'll be mentioning this later, foreshadowing warning. I think this is good to include explicitly alongside sort of the narrative discussion of it. So I would move to add a map of racially restrictive covenants to the housing element. I can even provide the data, and I would kindly ask for a second.
Maybe I got a little too formal with Councilor Shrubnik for this discussion. I don't want to be taking a formal vote on each of these. Is there any objection to including the map and the data that Councilmember Culver has in the plan? Not hearing an objection.
Cool, and I got one more thing. Kind of building on Councilmember Sassen's point that she was bringing up. There's a lot of good stuff in the analysis that got added, the land capacity analysis, the work the consultants did. Bunch of great stuff in there, and the Planning Commission didn't really get a bite at that apple. It was added sort of after they approved it. I really do want to have a robust discussion. So I would ask, could we ask them to review it as a body? And if we don't have time, could we do possibly a joint meeting with the Planning Commission? Housing and affordable housing in particular are critically important goals for the city, so I hope we can give this deserving topic its due diligence. I will not ask for a second.
Debbie, is there thoughts on that?
So let me give some contextual background first. So the land capacity analysis is a new requirement. And so we have a previously buildable lands capacity that showed we had significant land supply to meet housing. This new requirement says we have to show that we have not only the sufficient land capacity, we have sufficient land capacity and areas zoned to meet all levels of housing affordability. So our consultant followed the methodology provided by Commerce, and we in fact do have sufficient land capacity and areas zoned to provide those housing targets. So basically this is a show your work document. The Planning Commission, we had a placeholder to say that we had sufficient land capacity. I don't know what the discussion would be. We followed the guidance, we followed the methodology, we have the results. We have provided that information to the Department of Commerce along with the draft elements, and they are the ones that will determine if we have in fact done the job correctly. So I don't know what the robust discussion will be about. Certainly we can have that, but we do also need to adopt these elements by the end of the year to also meet the state mandated deadline of having these full comprehensive plan update completed by the end of this year.
And just to clarify on that, other things I was elaborating on or alluding to, I guess, would be the sufficient provisions, I'm getting the terminology wrong, but things that we would do, right? The actions we would take. There's some good stuff in there. I think it warrants more discussion. And I guess to your point on the deadline coming up, totally understood. We got to have that submitted by end of year. That said though, like a lot of these books, a lot of these laws have been on the books for a number of years now. Some of this passed in 2021, if I'm not mistaken. I might be wrong on that, but all to say, like, I think we've got 6 weeks. I would even be happy, scheduling a special for this or something. So I just hope we can also include the Planning Commission as sort of a full member in this conversation.
If I can ask for further clarification, are you concerned more about the implementation measures and the regulations to implement the housing policies?
All the above.
So again, the comprehensive plan is a document that sets the framework. We're not talking about the implementation measures. Those are a future work program item, whether that is in relation to the middle housing regulations or permanent supportive housing regulations or developing an affordable housing strategy. So right now, we're just really talking about the policy framework, and the rest of the discussion and the regulatory framework is going to be a future docket work program item, some of which will become directly to council, some which will go back to the Planning Commission.
Completely understood. And let me just make sure I'm understanding you. We're going to be taking up in the future those code pieces for that, for how to tackle missing middle or permanent supportive housing or whatever the case may be. Yes, fully understood. I'm just saying, I would also love to get Planning Commission's eyes on what is there in the table, sort of the policy level that we're talking about, what we need to have done before the end of the year.
Planning Commission has given you that recommendation. They gave that to you on October 28th. They gave you the policy recommendation on housing, including policies directly for affordable housing.
Understood, but there was a lot added later. That's what I'd like to get the Planning Commission's input on, I guess.
The only thing that is added later is the housing capacity memo.
And the adequate
that really
provisions.
is not really it's not really a policy discussion. It is a report, an analysis that supports that we have the capacity available. And so you have to say then, if we have the data to say that we have the capacity, do the policies that the Planning Commission recommended to you support being able to meet those targets? Are there sufficient policies in place?
Well, the other piece was the adequate provisions, if I'm getting that term right. I guess I would look to my colleagues if they're also confused by this, but I would appreciate hearing from the Planning Commission. I can leave it at that.
Councilmember Shrubnik and then Councilmember Sassen.
I have a variant on Councilmember Culver's comment. I also thought the Kimley Horn report had a lot in it. I'm personally totally comfortable with approving the housing element, but I also would like, I don't know whether it's a presentation or a study session or a discussion, but I really did feel like I wanted someone to walk me through that land capacity report and allow a little time for discussion. And that could be or doesn't have to be with the planning commission, but this is the first time we've seen a report like this, and there's a lot to it. So and that discussion presentation doesn't have to be before the end of the year, but it would be nice to have that. I do concur with Councilmember Culver on that.
Councilmember Sassen?
I think I'm in full agreement. I'm willing to, and prepared to act on the needs of this report for the end of the year. And I would like in 2025 for us to have a joint study session to talk about housing, because it's such a high priority for this council stated on our goals. And I think they're two separate issues, and I think you've done a great job this end of delineating the issues. So I feel prepared to move forward on your needs for today. And I just want to say that I too would like a joint session in 2025.
Any objections to a joint session to run through housing and the land capacity report in 2025? Planning Commission?
Do we have anybody else supporting one sooner? I guess I would just ask. I'm otherwise on board. I would just ask about timeline.
Not seeing any hands shooting up for one between now and the first of the year. So let's do that in 2025 then. All right, back to substantive issues or changes, proposed changes to the housing element and land use element. Questions, any thoughts? Speak now, Councilmember Lutsis.
No suggestion, just a thought. Wanted to thank you for all your hard work. I saw that my colleagues' notes and my notes were all incorporated. Thank you for all your hard work.
Any further discussion? I will say what Councilmember Lutz said. Thank you very much. We really appreciate it. I know we toss a lot at you, so thank you for everything you do.
I want to say I also appreciate this. The Planning Commission had a heavy docket this year, and we've brought things forward to you throughout the year. I know it feels like we're bringing forward a lot at the end of the year, but unfortunately, due to timing and other items on the docket, it's just how it needs to be this year. It does not mean that there is an end to the discussion on housing and implementation. That will continue on implementation, and also to note that the comprehensive plan is not a static document. There is always the ability to update in future years. Thank you.
Thank you. This brings us to our final piece of our business agenda, the 2025 fee schedule, resolution 24-420, presented by Development Services Director Samantha Loyuk.
Good evening, council. So in the packet, there's no presentation for this. It's just the 2025 fee resolution or fee schedule. This is an annual update, and provided as part of the packet is a summary of changes that describes in detail what items have changed and why. The agenda bill provides a summary or of items that may be of interest, of particular interest. Without going through all of those, this fee resolution update is kind of managed every year by Development Services, but the fees come from all areas or departments of the city, with the bulk of them being Development Services. That's why we do the update. There is an increase of 3.6% that applies to most development review permits, and that's a recommendation from the finance director. based on the CPI. And then there are some minor changes to code enforcement fees and then impact fees as well. And then there have been some changes based on some feedback on how we could reorganize it so that it's a little more user-friendly for developers and for residents. So, do you have any questions on the resolution before you?
Questions? I'm not seeing any. Is this keeping our, I know a few years ago, we passed, I can't remember if we passed a resolution or we gave direction on what percentage of cost recovery we wanted from some of our permitting and building permits.
Yeah, it is consistent with that, although we are due for a fee study. So the fee study is tentatively planned for 2025.
And are we recovering something like 85% or something like that?
I'd have to double
Okay,
check.
all right. I just
Sorry.
wanted to make sure we're still thinking about that. Mr. City Manager?
Yeah, our city clerk pointed out something, the picnic shelter fee is actually in this resolution, much to my correction. Can we point that out? Can we go to that page?
What I'm looking at is page 17 of 18 on the attachment number 2, proposed resolution, Exhibit A, 2025 fee schedule. And if you want, we can project that. One moment.
I have it. Yeah, if you want to project.
Park shelter rental fees.
So I stand corrected. The policy's coming to you next month, but it looks like the fee is in front of you right now.
Part of that is because we do one update for this annual update, and we kind of do a call for fee updates to all the departments.
Councilor Shubnik?
Yeah, I missed this. How do, I mean, these seem kind of high. Are they comparable to other places?
So these fees were determined by Public Works Operations Manager Jennifer
Okay,
Gordon.
yeah.
So I'm not sure if Rob, if you can speak on the amounts or not.
Okay, so like if I'm a family and I want to reserve Log Boom picnic shelter for a party, that's an hour and a half. Well, I guess that's $75. I don't know. I don't know. It just seems high, but I could be wrong.
Mr. City Manager, maybe I'm wrong here, but this is something that could also be addressed and or changed when we get to the policy. We could do two things if we needed to, right?
You sure can. And I actually rented the picnic shelter as a resident earlier this year. And so I believe, don't quote me on this, but I believe it's pretty much similar to what's being charged at Rhododendron now. That's what it feels like. I think I paid around $75.
Mayor Herbig, I will let you know that our staff, Jennifer Gordon, is online and she does have her hand raised in case you wanted to ask her.
Okay, well, why don't we have Ms. Gordon speak to how she reached those, and then Councilmember Sassen.
Good evening, Council. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So what I wanted to add was these are existing picnic shelter rental rates that were used by the senior center, and we are just adopting these for all of the picnic shelters citywide. So these are existing fees. We're not raising the fees at all. These are the same fees that have been in place for several years, and it's always been part of our fee schedule.
And to
Councilmember
add,
Sapp.
oh, sorry.
All right, Councilmember Sassen. Yeah, I mean, yeah, Samantha.
I was just gonna say, to add on to what Jennifer said, before you on the screen is the 2024 fee schedule, which is current, and it does show that it's the same for Rhodey Park, so it was just changed to be a general fee for parks.
Councilor Sassen?
Yeah, I just want to put in a plug for some kind of deeply discounted or fee waiver, because I think that picnic shelters will often be used by people who don't have access to private outdoor space. And I want to make sure that our residents who are living in smaller apartments without access to the outdoors have that we, as a city, frankly subsidize that access. And I don't know exactly what that would look like, but I'd like there to be some kind of deeply discounted senior and low income rate. That's my recommendation.
Would you be amenable to us having that discussion when we get to the policies around this? Okay. So let's just make sure that we make that part of the conversation then. Any other questions, comments? All right, I'm not seeing any, so the chair would entertain a motion to approve resolution number 24-420.
Moved.
A second. We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, would the clerk please take the roll?
Certainly, on the motion to adopt resolution number 24-0420, the 2025 fee resolution, Councilmember Culver,
Yes.
Councilmember Sassen,
Yes.
Councilmember Lutsis,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor O'Kane,
Yes.
Councilmember Shrubnik,
Yes.
Mayor Herbig.
Yes, the resolution is adopted unanimously. Thank you very much. Staff report.
Just a reminder, you have another city council meeting day after tomorrow, 7 o'clock here.
Read
That's
your
all.
binders, everybody. Read your binders. All right, council member reports and comments. Councilmember Culver.
Thank you. I mentioned racially restrictive covenants previously. I've got a map here of them. I want to hark back to our old friend tree protections, because I think there's some interesting patterns that start to emerge when you overlap the map of what we passed versus those racially restrictive covenants. We can see some interesting disparities, I think. Would be a bit problematic when you also overlap that with this heat map that King County provided. Just to back up on that a little bit, with 2021 and the heat dome being, I think this anomaly of deaths suddenly when it hit, I don't know, 114 degrees or 121 degrees or what have you. We know those impacts hit marginalized communities especially hardest. And we have heat deserts that maps up well with where we do and where we don't have trees. So I think we got the tree protections thing wrong. I can't bring it back. I know these things take time, but part of how we sort of got off on the wrong foot with Plymouth was cited to be a community engagement thing, saying we didn't bring the community along. The community spoke very clearly on this. We want to have both. We don't want to pit housing against trees, et cetera. It can be both. And we've seen designs. We've seen other ways to do it. There's the road to nowhere. There's the developer agreements. There's other things, et cetera. Yeah, so I appreciate Elizabeth Mooney and others for speaking up on this. I hope that's something we could look at. And that is my bummer graph of the day. Thank you.
Councilmember Sassen.
I feel like I should have some NUSA and housing related updates to give, but I do not this evening. I will say that my curiosity is piqued by the many comments regarding the access road. And so I'm looking forward to gathering more information about that from staff. I really appreciate all the work that you all put into this whole budget process. It's my first go around and it is impressive. So thank you.
Councilmember Shrubnik.
Yeah, ditto. It's been a full team effort. It's pretty obvious and that's really appreciated. We've got the Racer Principals Assembly tomorrow, and in your consent agenda today was their budget. So I'm excited about that to get their update. From the data, it looks like we are still proportionately on the low side in terms of services to the folks in our community relative to our population compared to the other cities that are being served by Racer. So that's sort of an ongoing issue. The Regional Policy Committee has been working through the Doors Open implementation plan, and that is, Doors Open is the name of the kind of catch name of the arts levy, arts and culture levy that's countywide, and it's pretty exciting. And of course, Sound Cities Association's position is wanting to ensure that what was put in the legislation about geographic distribution of activities, resources, and services to populations really happens, so that it is not just focused on central Seattle, that it really is distributed throughout the county. So that's my update.
Councilor Lucis.
Yes, well, in the last 2 weeks, there was a Seashore Transportation Forum meeting and an East Side Transportation Partnership, and I'll kind of combine those two together since there's a lot of overlap. The Port of Seattle gave a report on SeaTac Sustainable Airport Master Plan. Both groups updated their legislative priority sheets that represent the groups. PSRC gave a report about their progress, and having recently reviewed about 2/3 of local cities' comp plans, and they noted that they're seeing a good variety of community engagement strategies implemented by a lot of cities, including, as they called out, youth advisory councils. Outside of that, I wanted to thank really quickly our staff for all the hard work and time that they are putting in. Thank you. And I also wanted to acknowledge yesterday, Veterans Day. Thank you to our veterans in the community. We appreciate, recognize, and thank you for your service. And just want to point that out. So thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
First, I want to thank our staff for the really important work that you bring before us in a professional, comprehensive manner. I want to thank our Planning Commission and Financial Sustainability Task Force for their outstanding work as well. I want to really give gratitude right here for living in a safe city that is not in a state of war. And yesterday was Veterans Day, and I pray that we no longer, at some point in our lifetime, don't have more veterans that have had to experience war. I truly pray for peace in our world and give thanks that we live in a peaceful place. And our country is funding genocide right now, and I stand for a free Palestine and peace in the Middle East, in Ukraine, in Russia, and around the world. Really thankful to be here tonight. That's it.
I don't have a ton to report. I've been kind of out of service for the last week or so, but I do want to make sure that you all read your binders that we got from the city manager between now and Thursday. And I do want to just give a bit of a shout out. We learned during the meeting, it was officially rolled out that King County Executive Dow Constantine will not be seeking another term. So that just went public while we were meeting. And I just want to make sure that I just want to acknowledge his 16 years as executive and the tremendous leadership he brought to the county. He came in during really intense, a really hard financial time, and he did a lot of work to a lot of behind the scenes administrative stuff that really righted the county, I think, and has set it up for a lot of success. And he's led on issues like the crisis care levy that we passed last year and a lot of other important initiatives. So, and he was having his annual 39th birthday party tonight, and I wasn't able to make it because, well, I'm here with all of you. So anyway, I just want to acknowledge his leadership and his public service. So with nothing more to come before us, we are adjourned.